Introduction. The urge to justify. You have explained yourself many times today. To the person who asked why you made that choice. To the colleague who questioned your reasoning. To the family member who raised an eyebrow at your plans. To the internal audience that follows you everywhere, cataloging every decision and asking whether it can be justified to anyone who might one day ask. The urge to explain is not irrational. In a social species, the approval of others was historically tied to survival. Being understood and accepted by your group was genuinely important. The brain that monitored for disapproval and preemptively managed it through explanation was, in many contexts, the brain that survived. But there is a difference between the explanation that serves genuine communication, that builds understanding, that repairs a misperception, that contributes to a real relationship, and the explanation that is driven by the need for approval. The first is useful. The second is exhausting, self-undermining, and ultimately doesn't achieve what it's reaching for. Because the approval it is trying to secure from people who require justification for your choices is not, in fact, available to be secured. This book is about the difference between those two kinds of explanation, and about developing the capacity to offer the first without needing to compulsively produce the second. Chapter 1. Why you over-explain. Over-explaining is anxiety's solution to the problem of disapproval. The anxiety says, if they understand my reasons, they will not judge the choice. If they see the logic, they will not criticize the outcome. If I preempt every possible objection with a sufficiently detailed account, I will be safe from the judgment I fear. The solution does not work, for a simple reason. People who are inclined to judge your choices are not typically deterred by explanation. If anything, the explanation provides more material. More surface area for analysis, more opportunities to find fault, more evidence of the level of importance you attach to their assessment. The over-explanation signals insecurity, and insecurity invites the kind of attention it most fears. More importantly, over-explaining exhausts you. The energy required to construct, deliver, and revise explanations for your choices, to constantly be in the position of defendant in the trial of your own life, is enormous. That energy is unavailable for the things that actually matter. The work, the relationships, the development of the kind of clarity about your own values that makes explanation unnecessary in the first place. Chapter 2. What you're really looking for. Beneath the compulsion to explain is usually a search for something that explanation is unlikely to provide: validation. The sense that what you are doing is right, confirmed not by your own judgment but by the agreement of whoever you are explaining to. Validation seeking through explanation is a loop that does not close. Even when the explanation produces the desired response, the agreement, the understanding, the nod, it does not produce what was actually sought. The relief is temporary. The next choice will need to be explained again. The next decision will need to be ratified again. The reassurance that external approval was going to provide does not come from external approval. It comes from a relationship with your own judgment that over-explaining was, in its own way, preventing you from developing. The alternative to validation seeking is not certainty, the feeling of being completely sure your choices are right. It is the development of a sufficient trust in your own process, not that you will always be right, but that you will make the best decision available with the information and values you have. Update when you get better information, and not require external affirmation to act. Chapter 3. The people who don't need your reasons. There are two categories of people to whom you owe no explanation for your choices. The first category is people who have not earned the relationship that would make their opinion relevant. The second is people who are going to judge your choices regardless of what explanation you provide. The first category is larger than it might appear. Not everyone who asks why you made a choice has a stake in the answer. Not everyone who raises an eyebrow at your decision is someone whose perspective you need to account for. The question is not whether someone has an opinion, but whether their perspective is informed enough, caring enough, and sufficiently invested in your actual well-being to be worth your explanatory effort. The second category is self-explanatory. The person who has already decided what they think of your choice before you finish explaining is not listening to the explanation. They are waiting for the explanation to end so they can say what they were always going to say. The explanation is not a factor in their judgment. It is therefore not worth producing for their benefit. Chapter 4. Boundaries don't need justification. One of the most common sites of compulsive explanation is the setting of personal boundaries. The person who declines an invitation, says no to a request, or limits access to their time or energy typically follows the refusal with an elaborate account of why. All the reasons, all the mitigating circumstances, all the evidence that the refusal is not about the other person but about some inescapable external constraint. The elaborate account serves the same function as most over-explanation. It is an attempt to avoid the other person's disappointment or disapproval by making the refusal seem inevitable rather than chosen. If I have to say no, if I have no choice, then the no is not a judgment of you or a reflection of my priorities. It is just how things are. But boundaries are chosen. The priority is real. And the person who has to construct elaborate justifications for their no is implicitly treating their own choices as things that need to be excused rather than things they're entitled to make. No is a complete sentence. I can't make it, offered without elaboration, communicates what needs to be communicated. The elaboration is for the explainer's anxiety, not for the other person's information. Chapter 5. When explanation is appropriate. Not all explanation is over-explanation. There are contexts in which explanation is appropriate, useful, and genuinely communicative rather than anxiety-driven. Explanation is appropriate when there is a real misunderstanding that has genuine consequence, and the explanation would correct it. It is appropriate when you are in a relationship of genuine accountability, a manager with a team, a partner in a shared life, where the other person has a legitimate stake in your reasoning. It is appropriate when you are in a context of genuine learning, when the other person's response will actually inform your thinking and the exchange is mutual rather than adversarial. The test is not whether explanation feels necessary. It feels necessary almost all the time, because the anxiety that drives over explanation is not well calibrated to actual necessity. The test is whether the explanation would serve the other person, or whether it would primarily serve your own need to be understood, approved of, and safe from judgment. The former is communication. The latter is management of anxiety dressed as communication. Chapter 6. The energy of not explaining. The freedom that comes from stopping compulsive explanation is not primarily the freedom from other people's judgment. Their judgment continues whether or not you explain. It is the freedom from the internal labor of managing that judgment. From the constant monitoring of how you are being perceived. From the construction and revision of accounts that justify your choices to audiences who may or may not be receptive. That labor is enormous. For people who have been managing disapproval through explanation for most of their lives, the cessation of that labor reveals a quantity of available energy that was previously invisible, because it had always been spent before it could be noticed. The energy was always there. The explanation was consuming it. That energy, retrieved, can go somewhere useful. Into work. Into relationships that are chosen rather than maintained by obligation. Into the development of the kind of internal clarity about your own values that makes the external validation you were seeking less necessary. The less you need to be understood and approved of, the more clearly you understand and approve of yourself. Chapter 7. Your choices are yours. There is a philosophical position implicit in compulsive explanation, that your choices are subject to a tribunal, and that the tribunal's approval is required for the choices to be legitimate. That tribunal might be a parent, a partner, a peer group, or simply the imagined observer that follows you everywhere. Its approval is the standard by which the choice is validated. The alternative position is that your choices are yours, not in the sense that they have no consequences for others, or that others are not entitled to have opinions about them, but in the sense that the authority to make them resides in you rather than in the tribunal. You are not required to prove your choices are good before making them. You are not required to defend them after making them. You are required to make them as honestly and thoughtfully as you can, to bear the consequences, and to update as you learn. The shift from tribunal-based to self-based authority is one of the more significant transitions available in adult life. It does not produce freedom from judgment. Other people's opinions of your choices continue. But it changes the relationship to those opinions. They become information, which may or may not be useful, rather than verdicts, which require a response. Chapter 8. Tolerating Disapproval. The capacity to be disapproved of without collapsing, without immediately moving to explanation, defense, or the accommodation of whoever is doing the disapproving, is a skill. It is uncomfortable to develop and genuinely useful to possess. Most people who over-explain have never really tested the question of what happens if they do not explain. The explanation feels mandatory, not a choice but a necessity. Testing it means sitting with the discomfort of having declined to explain, of allowing someone to be confused or disappointed or disapproving, and observing what actually happens. In most cases, what happens is less than was feared. The tolerance for disapproval is built the same way other tolerances are built, through graduated exposure. Start with low-stakes non-explanations. Offer a decline without elaborate justification. Hold a boundary without constructing the case for it. Observe that the world continues. The relationship, usually, continues. The other person adjusts. And the tolerance, having been exercised, becomes slightly stronger than it was before. Chapter 9. When you're explaining to yourself. Not all over-explanation is addressed to other people. Some of the most exhausting explanation happens in the privacy of your own head, the internal monologue that reviews, revisits, justifies, and re-justifies every significant choice, not to anyone in particular, but to the internal critic that never quite seems satisfied. The internal critic is often more demanding than any external audience. It has access to every piece of contrary evidence. It knows every uncertainty and every doubt. And it applies a standard of justification that no real decision could meet, because real decisions are made with incomplete information and the internal critic reviews them with the benefit of hindsight. The relationship with the internal critic is changed not by winning arguments with it. It is a better arguer than you are, because it has nothing to lose, but by changing what you take it to be. Not the final word on the quality of your choices. Not a verdict you must respond to. One voice among several, whose assessment carries whatever weight you choose to give it. That weight, in the lives of compulsive self-explainers, is usually far too high. Chapter 10. The life that doesn't need constant approval. The life that does not need constant approval is not a life of indifference to others. It is not the life of someone who does not care what other people think or feel. It is the life of someone who has developed a sufficiently clear relationship with their own values that the approval of others, while welcome, is not required. In that life, the opinions of people you respect are genuinely informative, they update your thinking, they challenge your assumptions, they help you see what you could not see from your own position. The opinions of people who do not know you, or who are invested in a particular version of you, are heard and then evaluated for what they are worth. Which is sometimes something, and sometimes nothing. The choices in that life are made from the inside rather than managed from the outside. They are made according to your own understanding of what matters and why, not without input, but not dependent on ratification. And they are offered to the world without the elaborate preamble of justification, because the person who made them has made peace with having made them. Conclusion. The sentence that ends. There is a version of you that is not explaining anymore. Not defending, not justifying, not preempting. A version that makes its choices, offers what is actually useful to offer, and then is finished. without the anxiety-driven addendum, the hedge against every possible interpretation, the elaborate case for why this choice was the reasonable one. That version of you does not have perfect clarity about every choice. They are still uncertain about some things and wrong about others. But they have developed a sufficient trust in their own judgment, built through the practice of making choices and bearing their consequences, that the constant management of other people's responses no longer seems necessary. You get there not through a sudden release of caring but through the slow accumulation of experience that you survived not explaining. That the world continued. That the relationship was fine. That the person had the response they were going to have regardless. And that the energy you would have spent explaining was available for something better. Key takeaways. Over-explaining is anxiety's solution to the problem of disapproval. It signals insecurity, provides more material for judgment, and does not achieve the approval it is reaching for. The underlying search is for validation. External validation does not provide what is actually sought. That comes from developing trust in your own judgment. Not everyone who asks for an explanation deserves one. The standard is whether their perspective is informed, caring, and genuinely invested in your well-being. Boundaries do not require justification. The elaborate account that accompanies a no is for the explainer's anxiety, not the other person's information. Explanation is appropriate when it serves genuine communication, real misunderstandings with consequence, legitimate accountability relationships, contexts of mutual learning. The energy retrieved from compulsive explanation is substantial. It was always available, it was just consumed before it could be noticed. The tolerance for disapproval is a skill, built through graduated exposure. Most of the time, what happens when you do not explain is less than was feared. The internal critic is not the final word on your choices. It is one voice whose weight you choose to assign, and in most compulsive over-explainers, that weight is far too high. A note at the end. The person who does not require your explanation of your choices is usually not the person you most fear is out there. The people who matter most in your life, who actually see you, who are genuinely invested in your well-being, are generally not waiting for justification. They are waiting for you. The explanation you have been constructing is, in part, a substitute for presence. For the kind of direct, unhedged engagement with the people who matter that requires dropping the defensive account and simply being there. Less of that, more of this. You do not owe anyone a constant accounting of your inner life. You do owe the people you love your presence, your honesty, and your genuine engagement with theirs. Those are different things. The first is cheaper to offer. The second is worth far more.